Welcome to this edition of Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. I'm Fulton County Commissioner Robb Pitts. The purpose of our program is to provide you with in-depth information on topical issues. Today, I'll be talking with a great pastor, Harvard graduate, former Marine, and civil rights trailblazer, the Reverend Willie Marion Bolden. Reverend Bolden played a key role in voter registration drives in Georgia, and he was active in the Hosea Williams Summer Community Organization for Political Education, which was better known during the day as SCOPE, S-C-O-P-E. Reverend Bolden worked diligently for many years with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and later with Reverend Ralph David Abernathy. Now, many of you may know him as the wagon master for the mule train on the Poor People's Campaign, where he prepared cities for Dr. King's arrival. But you will probably never forget Reverend Bolden's participation in the 1964 swim-in in St. Augustine, Florida, at the white-only Monson Pool. When we return, we will talk history with Reverend Willie Bolden here on Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. Welcome back to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line, and welcome, Reverend Bolden. First, I want to thank you for your service and taking the time to be with me today on the show. You know, we started talking about this show, although we've had to cancel a couple of times due to the weather, but we started talking about having you on the show during the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration when we sat next to each other.
Right.
And I was just so fascinated by what we were talking about, and my daughter often reminds me that you spoke to her when she was in elementary school at Warren Jackson, yeah, about your involvement. So anyway, let's get started. Give us a little bit about your background, first of all, where you were born and so forth.
Okay. Well, I was actually born in Sumter, South Carolina on December the 7th, 1938. And unfortunately, 3 days after I was born, my mother died. And they asked my mother's brother if they would take me and raise me, with the understanding that they take me off of that farm in Sumter. About 3 years later, my parents moved to Savannah, Georgia, and that's where I was raised. That's where I went to school. I left Savannah, went into the Marine Corps, did a hitch in the Marine Corps, left there and went to New York. Stayed in New York a couple of years, and I soon found out that New York was not the city for me, that one or two things were going to happen. One, either I was going to end up in the penitentiary, or the other, I was going to end up dead. And neither one of those options I wanted to experience. So I came back to Savannah, and I got a job on the waterfront as a longshoreman. And I kept saying to myself every day that there's got to be a better way to make a living than working on the waterfront, because you could not go to work there eating a peanut butter sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, my mom used to fix my lunch for me, and she would put it in a pan. And there you would have your pork chops or your neck bones and rice and greens and crackling cornbread.
I'm getting hungry.
I know you. But that's what you had to eat in order to be able to do the kind of work that had to be done. And so I left there and went to the Manga Hotel. At that time, there were 2 plush 5-star hotels, the Manga and the DeSoto Hilton. And while I was working there, Jose Williams, that's how I met this guy. Every day around 12 o'clock, you could set your watch by him. He would lead 200 or 300 people downtown Savannah in a park which is Johnson Park. And he would climb up on an Indian chief statue, which is still there today, by the name of Tommy Chichi. And Jose would talk about white folk in 1961 like I've never heard anybody talk about white folk. And I said to myself one day, Self, either this guy is one heck of a leader or he's crazy. And I had an opportunity to work long enough with Jose to find out that he was a little of both.
That's true.
But a great guy, a great guy. Who
and a brilliant guy.
Huh?
And a brilliant guy.
And a brilliant guy. Yeah.
Actually, he was a trained chemist.
Yeah. That's right. And when he was leading those folk in downtown Savannah, he would leave his job at lunchtime and bring the folk downtown and then dismiss them and go back to work. So Jose invited Dr. King. This is how I got involved in the movement.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. Jose invited Dr. King to come to Savannah to speak at a mass rally. Jose was holding mass rallies every night, on the weekend. And Dr. King said he would come. So when he got there, Jose was carrying him around town to let people see him because he didn't want folk to think he was just saying Dr. King was coming just to get a church full of folk. So they came in the pool room, Charlie Brown's pool room, which was my hangout. I started shooting pool at the age of 9 in a Presbyterian church right up the street from me.
Were you any good?
No, I was excellent.
What was your game?
9-ball.
9-ball.
9-ball was my game.
Yeah, because I asked him for this. I wanted to have a pool stick here, but they said I couldn't do that. But anyway.
9-ball was my game. And when Dr. King and Jose and Ben Clark and Dr. King's traveling companion Bernard Lee came in, he came over and they asked for our attention. Well, at the time he asked for our attention, I had 2 balls left on the table, the 8 and the 9. And I was focused on playing those 2 balls and get paid because I didn't play for fun. And I was playing and I was watching and trying to figure out how I was going to play these 2 balls because I played pool like Tiger Woods played golf. When he's putting, he's focused on what he's going to do. So Dr. King came over to me and said, young man, what's your name? Well, I didn't know who he was. I said, what's your name? He said, I'm Martin Luther King Jr. I said, I'm Willie Bolden. He said, I promise if you just give me a few minutes of your time, we'll be out of here. Well, back then, Commissioner, we had what was called pool room etiquette. Pool room etiquette was, if you were not playing, you sat on the bench around the walls and watched everyone else play. So I took my cue stick and chalked it up and went and sat down. And Dr. King made this little spiel, and he wasn't very long. And after he finished, he said, thank you guys for listening to me. And of course, I got up and went back to the table, and I'm saying now, I want to bank this 8-ball cross side, I want to play 9-ball in the corner and get paid. And you know, you can tell when someone is watching you. I thought they had gone out the door, but then I found out from just the feeling that they were standing there watching me play this game. And I remember leaning across the table, and I said, Lord, now you know I better not miss this shot now with him watching me. And I didn't. I banked the 8-ball cross side, I played the 9-ball in the corner, and I got paid. Well, Commissioner, that evening, I went home. And I was getting ready to come out for the evening. I had a good day. I what a nice little bit of money. And while I was taking my bath, and when I talk to kids, young kids, I make a point of letting them know in 1961, which is not a long time ago, I was taking a bath, not a shower. Mm-hmm. Because in 1961, we were living in some row houses, and there were no showers. You had to go outside, pour a little water in a pump, prime the pump, get the water, bring it in, put it on the stove, get it hot, pour it in the number 310 tub, which was placed around the big potbelly stove, mm-hmm. and take your bath. So I did, and while I was taking my bath, I could hear Dr. King in the recess of my mind talking about segregation, injustice, voter registration without any taxation, without representation. So I decided I wanted to go and hear him. Well, after I treated him so bad, I didn't want my boys to know that I wanted to go. So I walked 2 blocks out of the way to get to the church. And when I got to the church, folk were all over everywhere. I mean, the church was jam-packed. And I found a spot on the back, in the back, on the wall. And I just stood there and I listened to this guy. And Commissioner, I never saw anybody who had such control over a group of people. He literally picked folk up out of the pew and sat them down at will. And then all of a sudden, chill bumps came all over my body. And I remember saying, a man is not supposed to make another man feel the way this man is making me feel just by talking. So he finished his speech, and I went around the wall with everybody else to shake his hand. And when I reached out to grab his hands were so soft. I didn't want to give him a limp shake, mm-hmm. but at the same time, I wanted him to know that a man was shaking his hand. So I squeezed it just enough to let him know that. And I said, Dr. King, I enjoyed your message. And he said, Willie, I'm glad you came. And when he said that, holding my hand, electricity went all over, all through my body.
We're going to have to take a break right there, but that, I assume, was the incident that got you involved in the movement.
That's what got me involved.
Well, when we return, we will talk more with civil rights icon, Reverend Willie Bolden, here on Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. We're going to focus on the one incident that I'm most mindful of at that hotel there.
Okay.
Welcome back to Robb's Review, The Bottom Line, where we're talking with civil rights activist Reverend Willie Bolden. Reverend Bolden, that was a great, really explanation of how you became involved in the movement. But mm-hmm. the one incident, though, that I think that you, among many, are most known for, though, recorded in history, mm-hmm. is the situation at the Munson Hotel. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, in St. Augustine, Florida.
Yes, correct.
As a matter of fact, I always like to make this point before I go into it, and that is the civil rights movement in 1964 in St. Augustine, Florida.
The speed at which the action develops and the need for officers to pursue the attack. It is most important to act quickly to arrest those who engage in these fights.
Most people don't know that. That was one of the most brutal civil rights movements that we had during the 60s. But on this particular occasion, we went to the Munson Hotel to try to integrate it.
It was all white at the time.
All white. And we had a white guy who was working with us by the name of Al Lingo, who lives in Atlanta today.
Did you ever see him and talk to him?
Oh, yeah, I see Al all the time. And Al's responsibility was, because he was white, to go and check into the hotel because he had no problem doing that. And then we would go in, and those who were going to swim would change clothes and go and jump in the pool.
Could they swim?
Oh, yeah, they could swim.
Could you swim?
I could swim.
Okay, all right. I'm just checking.
A Marine.
Okay, just
you
checking.
had to know how to swim.
Yeah.
But on this particular day, J.T. Johnson and about 4 or 5 others went and jumped into the pool, and I took another group. We were trying to integrate the restaurant.
Okay, now were there white people in the pool at the time?
Yes. And when they jumped in, all the white folks jumped out. I don't know what they thought. Maybe they were going to rub off on them or something. But the owner of the hotel, Mr. Munson, he went in the shed and came back with 2 gallons of acid. And while they were swimming, he ran around the pool pouring that acid in the pool. But he didn't have sense enough to realize that the chlorophyll in the pool would dilute the acid. So what JT and those did, they just kept right on swimming. And he went berserk. And finally, the police came, of course, and locked everybody up. And the next day we went back. We were going to do the same thing. And when they got to the pool, they had placed a 6-foot alligator in the pool. So needless to say, they decided not to swim that day. But that's what happened in St. Augustine.
Now, did you actually get in the pool yourself?
No, I didn't get in the pool. It was J.T. Johnson and about 4 or 5 others. I took a group to the hotel trying to integrate the restaurants.
All right, so what happened in the restaurant?
Oh, we never did make it. They stopped us at the door. And while JT and those were in the pool, the police came and they locked all of us up for trespassing because we refused to leave. Yeah. And of course, St. Augustine was also the place where Ambassador Andrew Young was jumped on by the Klan, and they were beating him up. And of course, we had gone through training.
That's a little-known fact. I never knew that Andy was ever beaten.
Oh, yes. In St. Augustine, Florida, they were trying to kill him. And I ran over and jumped on top of Andy, put his head in my stomach the way we were trained to do, and covered up my head to keep them from busting my head open. And they finally quit. And the police just stood there and let it happen. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Now let's talk a little bit about Hosea Williams.
Jose was a guy who, I describe him like this. If we were in combat and there was shooting going on all around us, and I was sleepy, and I say, Jose, I need to take a nap. And Jose said, go ahead, Bolden. I would go in the corner and pull my coat up over me and go to sleep. He was the guy who you could always depend on. What most people don't know about Jose is this. Jose was in Germany, and they were in a foxhole. Hand grenades came in, killed everybody in the foxhole except Jose Williams. The ambulance finally got there. They loaded Jose onto the ambulance. On the way to the hospital, the ambulance drove over a mine. The driver, his assistant, was killed, but Jose survived. He made it to the hospital, stayed in the hospital about 15, 16 months, got out of the hospital, came back on the way back home to Alapokus, Georgia, which is a little ways outside of Bainbridge, Georgia. And at the bus station in Americus, Georgia, he made the mistake of drinking some water out of a white-only fountain. And some white guys jumped on him at the bus station. And that's when Jose made up his mind that he was going to be a civil rights man. Mm-hmm. That's how he got involved in the civil rights movement.
Now, what about the strategy sessions that y'all would have before you would decide to go into a town? Not Andy, but the foot soldiers, if you will.
Yeah. Well, what we would do would meet at Pasco's on Hunter Street.
Right here.
Right here in this city. On Hunter Street, which is now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. And James Pasco's gave us room 101. That was our meeting room. Whenever we need to have a meeting, we were always able to go to room 101 and have our strategy meetings. And that's where we would meet. Dr. King would say, for an example, Dr. King would say, we're going into St. Augustine, because Mrs. Amelia Boynton had asked him to come in along with a dentist by the name of Dr. Haley. Well, he said, look, we're going to go into St. Augustine. You guys map it out. We went in room 101, mapped it out, decided who we were going to send, and we were the ones who went in to organize the cities, to get the cities ready for Dr. King. So when he got there, all he had to do was knock him out at the pulpit.
So when you say get them ready, what does that involve? What does
well,
that
involve? Involved getting the community ready to see whether or not they really wanted a movement.
I mean, getting them worked up?
Getting them worked up. We never went into a city unless we were invited. That's the one thing I liked about SCLC. We didn't just, because something happened, took off and go there. We were invited to come in. So our job was to go in, meet with the leadership, meet with the ministers, meet with whoever say they're leaders and appointed leaders, and get them to buy in to what we wanted to do. And then we would start having mass rallies on a nightly basis, on the weekends. And then when we felt that it was time for Dr. King, then we'd call Randy Blackwell, and they would say, okay, Dr. King, they say they're ready for you. And then Dr. King would come in.
Now, was there ever a time where y'all were afraid? And the reason I say were you afraid, because I mean, I would not be where I am but for people like you and others. I know that the top leadership would get all the credit. But I'll be honest with you, I was in school in Mexico doing a lot of this and think about that quite a bit. So I just want to say a public thank you to again. But were there instances or moments when, you know, you were in room 101 or wherever you were that you were saying, man, we can't do this, I'm scared?
No. Well, let me say it this way. In the room when we were strategizing, no. Now, when we got to certain cities and came in contact with the Klan and the White Citizen Council, there were times when we were afraid. I remember one particular incident in Marion, Alabama, when Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed. James Orange had already been assigned there, and he was there working. Dr. King was supposed to go speak, but he developed laryngitis and couldn't go. So he sent me and J.T. Johnson and Big Lester Hankerson and Leon Hall and Henry Brownlee to conduct the mass rally. Our plan was to go ahead and hold the mass rally because they thought Dr. King was coming and the people were there. Conduct the mass rally, lead the folk out, march around the courthouse, stop, have a word of prayer, sing a freedom song, go back to the church, and let them go. Well, when we got the folk outside, the Klan and the sheriff and his posse jumped on us and started beating us with billy clubs, and also the TV folk. The sheriff had one of his deputies to come and jack me up and carried me over to him and said, "Where's that Martin Luther coon?" I said, I don't know a Martin Luther King. I know a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't say, and he wouldn't even repeat his name. He said, where's that Martin Luther King? And I said, I don't know a Martin Luther King. I know a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I said that, by the time I had the junior out of my mouth, he stuck his pistol in my mouth, cocked the trigger back, and said, if you breathe, nigga, I'll blow your so-and-so brains out. Of course, I didn't breathe because I'm telling you about it today. He snatched it out. The aim on the pistol cracked my two front teeth. He bust my head open. They took me to jail, and when I got to jail, I saw James Orange's blood on the
We got to stop one more time. We can go on and on and on with this. I'm sorry, we're going to have to take a break here. But we will be back with some concluding remarks from Reverend Willie Bolden. This is Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. We've been reliving history with Reverend Willie Bolden. We only have about 2 minutes left. And I mean, we can go on and on and on, but what was the worst city that you had an experience with or in?
Well, I think it would have to be two cities.
Okay.
St. Augustine was one, and that's because we were beaten every day, 6 days a week, twice a day.
Brutally beaten.
Brutally beaten.
Not just
Every
push it
day.
and shove.
No, I'm brutally beaten. I mean, yeah, I'm talking about folk actually getting hurt. And the next city would be Selma, Alabama. And I guess if I had to put a third city, I would put Grenada, Mississippi, where I literally witnessed, we were demonstrating, and the Klan jumped on us. We had turned the schools out. And I literally saw a white guy, a white Klansman, take his foot and stick it between a 9-year-old boy's crotch and twist his leg and broke it in 2 places. Mm-hmm. And when we took the kid to the hospital in Grenada, they refused to wait on him. And that's when I found out that there was an all-black city in Mississippi by the name of Mount Bio. So we had to take this young boy to Mount Bio in order to get him some service.
Unbelievable. Well, we're really out of time. Okay. And I mean, I can't thank you enough for what you did, and what others like you did, and what this has meant to all of us, black, white, no matter who you are, where you're from, what language you speak. It doesn't really matter, because this has been beneficial for all of us. I'm going to have to make time to, and depending on your schedule, to get you back so we can continue. This is really living history, and you can read about it, that's okay. You can see it on TV, that's okay. But when you hear from someone like you, who were there, you experienced it, that's what brings it to life. That's what makes it real. That's why we're going to have you back. I don't have any concluding remarks today. This has been more than we could have ever dreamed of. So well, thank you for what you've done, not only for your civil rights service, but the military service. And we didn't even get into the fact that you're also ministering what you're doing there. So we got a lot more to talk about. Thank y'all for being with us today. And this is Robb's Review, The Bottom Line. I hope you tune in the next time.